Kevin Rudd will be Australia's next ambassador to the United States, and joining me live is former US Ambassador Joe Hockey over the phone. Thanks so much for your time, Mr. Hockey. First of all, our political reporter Trudy McIntosh described this as the worst kept secret in Canberra. Were you surprised at all at this appointment? And as a former ambassador to the United States, what is your assessment as Kevin Rudd is our next man in Washington?
Look, Kevin Rudd has spent a lifetime in diplomacy, and he'll deploy all of his diplomatic skills, I'm sure, to make the appointment a raging success. It certainly has, an enormously powerful impact to appoint a former Prime Minister. And, of course, the United States in sending Caroline Kennedy to Australia has elevated the post here. So it's good for diplomacy, it's good for Australia, and I'm sure the Americans will give him a warm welcome.
He's the first former Prime Minister to be Ambassador or High Commissioner since Stanley Melbourne Bruce, Australia's 8th Prime Minister. Is there any danger, given his experience of being in charge, that he becomes an alternative foreign minister, or do you just see it as a positive that he was a former Prime Minister?
Well, whether you're a former Prime Minister or a former Treasurer or a former Deputy Prime Minister like Kim Beazley, the fact is that the starting point in Washington, D.C. is people will want to meet you. They want to meet and want to know two things: that the ambassador has real political experience and knows exactly what people in Congress go through to get elected and understands the political system in the United States. So that's number one, and that's very important. And number two, he will get a warm welcome because he is Australia's representative in Washington, D.C., and they will want to know that he has a direct line of communication to the Prime Minister. And, of course, Kevin Rudd does, as I did with Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison, and as Kim Beazley did with the various Prime Ministers he worked with.
Well, one of the duties of the ambassador is to greet ministers, as you know, welcome them to Washington, D.C. Is he going to be happy to carry the bags of Anthony Albanese and other ministers, do you think?
Yeah, it's always a moment of humility, and it just takes a little bit of personal judgment. But I'll be quite interested if he does what I have to do, and when the minister is visiting town, make sure they get around and get all the meetings that they require.
Is there anything that you used to do that you think Kevin Rudd would be uncomfortable in doing?
Oh, we can all be uncomfortable from time to time in the tasks we have to undertake. But look, he'll be fine. I mean, as a former Prime Minister, and he won't be the only former Prime Minister who's become a diplomat in Washington D.C. I mean, Washington D.C. is the modern Rome, and of course, in order to be heard, you need to have someone that has is respected. Someone that has a bit of bravado about them, that is prepared to smash down the closed doors. Now, Kevin Rudd has that capability. He does understand America as well. I mean, he's lived there recently for a few years. It's just going to be a balance, and no matter, you've got to put aside your prejudices, you've got to put aside your bias, and he'll be strongly supported by the embassy team, but also by others based in Washington, D.C., like myself, and former, ambassadors like Michael Thorley and a range of others. I mean, we all come together and put Australia first.
Joe Hockey, I just want to read you a bit from your 2022 diplomatic memoir. So there I was, a former politician who always thought he'd be Prime Minister about to become an ambassador, a job he swore he'd never do. Would Kevin Rudd have sworn he'd never do this?
That's a great question. You'll need to put it to Kevin Rudd. And look, I'm sure he'll do plenty of interviews about it. But it is one of the great jobs. I mean, it is after Governor General, it's the most significant appointment a Prime Minister makes, and frankly, it can go awfully wrong. as it did for a lot of countries when Donald Trump was president of the United States. But if you make a good fist of it, it can go incredibly well. And I'm sure that Kevin Rudd has enough humility to be able to, take good advice from lots of people, but also at the same time have the courage of his convictions to put Australia first.
Will he have to tone down or even turn off his vocal public commentary once he's in the role? He's been quite a vociferous critic of News Corp.
Yeah, well, there's no upside in that as Ambassador of the United States, given that, the media is all powerful in the United States. And of course there's bias everywhere, but I'm sure, there are bridges to be rebuilt, not just mended, but rebuilt in some instances. And look, Kevin Rudd understands diplomacy. He'll do a fine job. I have no doubt about that. And I think he does have enough humility to understand that there'll be, bridges that he'll need to rebuild with various parties, and you can do that. Because at the end of the day, he's a representative not of Kevin Rudd. He's a representative of Australia and Australia's interests, and I know Kevin Rudd puts the country first. So
as a US ambassador, would you say it would be appropriate or not appropriate for Kevin Rudd to be making commentary about the media landscape in Australia and overseas?
Oh, look, I think he's back to being a public servant, and there are certain guidelines and rules that you follow when you have a public service role, and particularly one where the megaphone that belongs to the ambassador to the United States is far larger than almost anyone else's outside of the political class.
Kevin Rudd speaks Mandarin. He has worked as a researcher of US-China relations, including at the Asia Society in New York, president of the Asia Society Policy Institute since January 2015, founding chair of the Asia Society Policy Institute Centre for China Analysis. As Foreign Minister Penny Wong heads to China, what signal is this sending to China? No doubt they may see this as a favourable appointment. And does this signal that Australia wants to gently push America towards a more cooperative relationship with China?
Well, it's a very good question. I'm not sure what Kevin Rudd's latest view is on China, but what I do know is that the US is becoming more and more conservative and concerned on a bipartisan basis about China and about future direction of the relationship with China. It's not improving, it's deteriorating. And Australia has a role to play. And in that sense, Anthony Albanese has made a pretty clever appointment with Kevin Rudd, in that he's sending someone that does have a deep understanding of China, which will give Kevin Rudd the opportunity to have meetings immediately with very senior people, not just in the administration but in the Congress. So that's terrific. But it's also the case that you've got to be mindful that America is putting America's interests first, and there's not a lot of opportunity to mediate in the relationship between the US and China. And if you do, you've got to be very careful not to go where elephants tread.
His former Labor colleagues have described the former Prime Minister as a psychopath, a micromanager and a control freak. Do you have any concerns about his management of staff in the role in Washington? Well, the one thing you can be sure of is if you treat people badly, that everyone finds out about it. So whether it's Kevin Rudd or anyone else, you just can't treat people badly. And the public service, and certainly not in the diplomatic mission. It is a very big mission. The embassy in Washington, D.C. is, around 400 people, but you're also responsible for all the other Australian diplomatic missions across the United States. And at the end of the day, military personnel. You have a lot of military personnel working in Australian military personnel working in the United States. So it's not just about Washington, D.C. The job is really about the whole of the United States. And when you're ambassador, you are ambassador for Australia to the whole country, not just to Washington, D.C. So there is a lot of travel involved, a lot of work, a lot of
glad-handing, but at the same time, serious diplomatic work, and he will have an opportunity to influence policy. One of the challenges is for him to build a direct relationship with Joe Biden or Joe Biden's successor if he's not the president in 2 years' time.
Joe Hockey, it's a pleasure to chat with you this afternoon. Thanks so much for dialing in.
No problems. Thanks very much.